everybody. Thank you so much for rejoining us. I'm with Rachel Hoyle from Nucleotide Nutrition. We've been having the most fascinating conversations over the last couple of modules about nucleotides and just how crucial they are for literally everything, every kind of activity of the human body. And it is just the most fascinating topic. So Rachel, welcome back. Thank you so much for joining us again.
Oh, it's a pleasure. It's really nice to talk about my pet subject.
Yes,
it's really good.
And the thing is, it's so interesting because so few people have had this completely missed out in their nutritional education. I mean, I certainly know that with my education in homeopathic medicine, where we did certainly discuss nutrition and so on as well, you know, we never touched on any of this. So I'm really learning. I'm just finding it so fascinating. And I know this next session is a real eye-opener because we're going to talk about the low nucleotide content of our modern diet. And at some point, I'm going to start really kicking off in this next section because it really applies to me as I eat a whole food plant-based diet. I'm vegan essentially, and so you're going to tell me some very interesting things that will definitely make me sit up and take notice. And it's very relevant actually because what's happening is as more and more people switch to plant-based diets, they need to hear this information. So without further ado, can you start by telling me what the nucleotide content is of different types of food, Rachel?
Yes, certainly. Well, all food will have a nucleotide content. Just some have more than others. The foods that contain the highest level of nucleotides are foods actually we don't tend to eat a lot of now. So you're looking at the offal meats, organ meats, have got the highest content. So like liver, kidney, brains, tripe. Now, all of these foods were eaten by our grandparents on a regular basis, and even before that, even more so. And if you can imagine a lion making a kill in the prairie, the first thing that the lion will go for is the stomach and the contents and the organ meats. In fact, it leaves the lean meat to the lesser in the pride or even the hyenas. So there's there's obviously reason why they do that, and that these organ meats are very nutrient dense now. So that's basically has a higher level, up to about 6% of the dry matter will be nucleotide content. So lean meat will have lower, and fish and seafood. Your yeast will have, as a percentage of the dry matter, a good level. Things like tofu and corn will have fairly good level. And then in terms of vegetables, vegetable type foods, they're much lower. They're less than 2% of the dry matter. Broccoli actually is the best of the vegetables that we found anyway, because what we do is I get the my Swiss colleagues who are the nucleotide manufacturers. They test different foods for the nucleotide content, and so they've tested quite a number of different types of vegetables and meats and all sorts of our foods that we generally eat. And I say broccoli has come out of best of the veg. What else is good in terms of vegetarian? Mushrooms are fairly good too. But all of these things you need to eat on a regular basis to get your nucleotide content.
And I think you also said about sprouting vegetables as
yeah,
well.
yeah. So
Sprouts
where there's a lot of activity going on
yes.
in the cell and the food, then you tend to get a higher content of the nutrients. So that would apply also to the nucleotides. So the RNA content in the cell will be higher because of its higher metabolism and higher and in the growth phase. So yeah, sprouting veg would be the way to go.
Right. Okay. Yes, that's really fascinating. It's very. My observation is obviously completely anecdotal, but having looked at lots and lots of people at places retreats where they do things, where they offer things like a raw vegan diet with predominantly living foods, sprouts and such. One of the complaints is that people. Well, it's not even a complaint because people feel extraordinarily energetic and they find that they need very little sleep, and I'm just wondering whether it's because they are finally getting foods that are not sort of dry, dusty, foods that are so overly processed and have nothing sort of particularly beneficial in them, but obviously they're getting a whole constellation of phytonutrients plus obviously the nucleotides.
Making them alive, isn't it?
Yes, it is. That's right, absolutely. And I was also but it's very telling because what you were saying there, just looking at the different proportions. I know that you were saying that organ meats, including liver pate, kidney, and cricket protein was one that you mentioned.
Yeah.
They contain over 400 milligrams of nucleotides per portion versus 100 milligrams per portion were things like tofu, corn, and obviously broccoli that you mentioned there. So we plant-based eaters we are missing out. Now, do you feel that we are able to get enough on our diets, or should we be supplementing? I guess that's what a lot of people will be asking.
Yeah, I think a lot depends on how you're getting your vegetables and how processed your foods are. If you're buying in a lot of processed foods that are vegetarian, then the nucleotide content's probably going to be even lower. So I think a lot depends on the source of what you're eating. To be honest, a lot will depend on your state of health. Because if you're in a disease status, you're going to need more nutrients generally than if you weren't. And also if you've got a lot of stress in the gut, then that's not going to absorb so well. So you're going to need to start off with more because the efficiency of absorption and digestion will be lower. And then what stress are you under? How busy is your life? How much emotional stress are you subjected to? Do you have children? What's your work life like? Stress comes in different ways and can be very positive, but also it can have a detrimental effect and will have an impact on how your body works and how much use it can make of the food that it's eating. And then you've got the sports person imposing stress on themselves for fun. Or their livelihood, and that's another sort of stress. Again, they need more nutrients, and that would include the nucleotides. So if the diet is not delivering enough, then certain processes in the body will be less efficient, and we would say that they would do well to supplement with an efficient form of the nucleotide, which is purified. And when I say purified, I do mean they still come from food, because, for instance, the nucleotides that we use in our foods and are used in, say, baby infant formula are derived from yeast. So the yeast cell, not actually the yeast that you're providing, but you're actually taking, say, the RNA from the yeast cell and purifying that, and then you're breaking that down further to the individual nucleotides, and they're purified. So the body we'll be able to utilize that very efficiently.
Right.
Yeah.
Rachel, may I just jump in there? Because I'm sure that there will be people watching who will go, oh no, not yeasts, because, you know, there's this probably, in my very, very humble opinion, possibly an overdiagnosis of Candida. When it's not necessarily, symptoms are not necessarily due to an overgrowth of Candida. No. But having said that, there are a lot of cases because of overuse of antibiotics, both medicinally and of course nutritionally. So, you know, that find their way into our diet. And of course, that's going to be an issue. Clearly, as you were saying, anything that disrupts the gut flora, i.e. antibiotics and so on, that's going to impact our nucleotide levels, of course. But the other thing, though, is if somebody has legitimately got let's say, a fungal overgrowth, such as Candida albicans, and the nucleotide supplements that you're providing can derive from the cell. Am I right in thinking the cell walls of the yeasts?
It's not the cell walls.
What is it exactly?
It's within the cell, the yeast cell, there will be DNA and RNA. So it's that portion of the cell that will be brought out, if you like, through a different process, breakdown, and then the RNA from there is so the actual cell wall goes somewhere else.
Right. I'm with you. So so basically then
so the yeast becomes irrelevant.
That, I think, will set a lot of people's minds at rest.
No, I can understand why he's mentioning yeast. People might think, oh well, but no, the nucleotides will be as a molecule. It won't be anything to do with the yeast anymore. You know, it's provided the nucleotides because we've been able to take the RNA and then break that down and everything. So
in that case, if I've understood you correctly, because of the incredibly deleterious effect of things like an overgrowth of Candida albicans in the gut, this really is signposting actually to the fact that somebody needs to supplement with nucleotides. Would that be a correct assumption?
Because the way the body would naturally overcome something like Candida would be the immune system would overwhelm it. So the way to really conquer it would be to enable the immune system, your immune system, to do just that. So in the gut itself, something like a bifidobacteria that really needs nucleotides from the diet because it can't make them themselves. If you can actually get that flourishing well, it's more able to counter, if you like, the Candida levels. You know, it's all part of that competition going on in the gut. And the more you can boost the immune system and the microbiomes, which is such an important part of it, and all those cells need nucleotides. The more robust that is, the more it can throw out, if you like, the unwanted overgrowths of things like Candida. So you know, we have to understand what does our body do to get rid of these things normally, and if it can't do that, why not? Now it may be that it just doesn't have enough of the building blocks with the different nutrients in order to be robust enough to get rid of, you know, the unwanted. And if that's a nucleotide deficiency, then obviously by taking supplemented forms, the purified nucleotides, then there's a greater chance that the immune system will be robust enough to conquer.
No, that makes a lot of sense, and I think that will be very comforting to a lot of people. And I do remember when we first spoke that you were telling me that when you were speaking at a health professionals conference in Ireland, I think you were on just before lunchtime, and
Yeah.
you were holding court and explaining to the people with different sort of eating styles, eating preferences, or what have you, the difference in nucleotide levels in the different meals. Tell us a bit about that, because I found that so fascinating.
Yeah. Well, because I knew I had the Prelunch spot, I managed to find out from the organisers of this Nutritional Therapists of Ireland conference what was on the buffet menu. And so what we did, I got my Swiss colleagues to advise me what the content of each of the different items available in the buffet. So what we did was we worked out for meat eaters what the content of nucleotides was in there from a portion size, compared with those who are vegans. So, and what we found was that the meat eaters were sort of getting around about 500 milligrams of nucleotides from their lunch, compared with just over 300 for the vegans. And I think that just highlights that the vegan would have been able to get a higher level had there been more items that were higher up the list.
Yes.
On the vegetarian front, but because nobody in terms of designing that buffet were really that conscious of nucleotide contents, and then that content, say just over 300 milligrams, perhaps could have been boosted up to near 400. But sadly it was sort of woefully short, and even the meat eating one could have been made a lot higher, or a bit higher, if it had sort of pate, or something with a higher content. So it was quite revealing for them. Sure. I mean, I did have to tell them that the fact there was a shortage in their lunch, that didn't mean they were just going to drop down dead, afterwards. And but I mean, over a period of time, what tends to happen if you have a shortage, initially you can cope, your body sort of copes, doesn't it, and everything, but over a period of time you tend to get these chronic type illnesses occurring if you're every day in a little bit of a shortage. You're going to end up with perhaps getting a gut disturbance, gut disease, and your immune system is perhaps going to be sluggish, so it's a chronic build-up of deficiency.
It's very, very interesting, isn't it? Because you do see illness in what I would call junk food vegans, because of course you can still be vegan, particularly if you have somebody who's an ethical vegan and they just are not interested in health at all, and you see some real shockers. But what I do notice in people who are following a whole food plant-based diet and know what they're doing, they are vegan, ethical vegan, or ecological vegan, or what have you, they, if managed correctly, they can do very, very well. But I do think it's important to be very mindful of what you're saying about further supplementation, because of course there are certain things, I mean, everybody's short of B12, whether they're omnivores or plant-based, and and various other nutrients. I mean, goodness knows, we're all short of vitamin D3, but I think we can make a very good case for probably most people, whether they're omnivores or vegan or what have you, probably being short of nucleotide nutrition. So, it's quite an interesting, it really is interesting. So thinking about deficiencies, what else is there that we can think about that actually increases the body's need for nucleotides, Rachel?
Yeah, I mean, a big thing is stress. Stress is a major factor in increasing the body's requirement for different nucleotides, for different nutrients, and that includes nucleotides. So, and we've done a lot of clinical work with different types of stresses, and what we found is that by actually providing purified nucleotides, when there's a stress imposed on the body, and it could, in our trials, it has been intensive stress, endurance stress, and resistance stress. What happens is, in a normal situation, you get a build-up of cortisol. And where that build-up of cortisol lasts for a period of time, that's when you get damage in the body. And what they found was, where the participants where the stress was being imposed on them had been taking the nucleotides, the actual build-up of cortisol was blunted, and it went up, which is normal. You would want that,
Yes.
but the actual increase was much shorter. The recovery period was slower, and was lower rather than slower, lower. And what that means is the less damage was being done. So stress will have a real impact on the amount of nucleotides you need, because you need to repair that damage. There's all sorts of reasons why under stress your body needs to have these additional nucleotides, but a lot of it is to do is repairing damage.
Yes, yes. It's interesting, isn't it? It just underpins yet another reason why we have to instigate stress response management techniques and so on, so that we are less reactive to stresses, because of course stresses are always going to occur, but it's presumably our reactivity. If we can manage our reactivity to stressors, would that actually somehow mediate the extra demand for nucleotides, do you think, or has that work simply not been done yet?
There is so much work that needs to be done. I mean, in some respects, what we've done, we feel is a lot, because obviously it costs a lot of money. Mind you, we were lucky we got quite a lot of grants to do the work, but there's so much that we don't know. And people ask me, well, if I take, you know, your nucleotides, will it help me for such and such a problem? Well, we haven't actually done that research. We can do is apply what we've done already to say, well, yes, we feel it will help you in this situation. I mean, there's all sorts of different digestive disorders, and you know, we've done clinical work with IBS, and there's been some external work with IBD, but all the other different types of diseases we haven't done. But we can suppose that if we have damage in the gut, it doesn't really matter how that damage has been done or what disease has caused it. That damage really needs to be repaired. Otherwise, there's all sorts of problems. You get leaky gut. So where there's damage, you need more nucleotides.
Yes.
And particularly in the gut, it's the first defense in a lot of instances. And so if you can actually keep the pools of nucleotides in the crypt, at the base of the villi, of all 5 nucleotides that we talk about, the purines and the pyrimidines particularly are the ones in shortage. If you can have a ready availability of nucleotides in those pools, you can get a much better morphology in the gut. You can repair lesions. The body is designed to do that maintenance and repair. All it needs is the bits and pieces to do it with. So, you know, stop the shortage there, you can repair a lot of damage, and you can help people's health. I mean, and as we know, we're finding out more and more and more, the gut is so important to our health and our brain and immunity. You know, it is, you know, such an important organ.
Yes.
And it's got such a big surface area.
Yes.
That you really need to keep it in tidy condition.
Yeah, absolutely. It makes absolute complete sense. So finally, for this section, can we just touch on, if somebody is depleted, you know, if their nucleotide levels are depleted, what sort of symptoms might we expect them to present with in clinic, in a clinical setting?
Okay. Well, firstly, that they probably have some form of gut disturbance, I would say, because if the gut can't repair itself efficiently and isn't able to absorb because the surface area is lower, or there's lesions of villi aren't very, growth has been stunted a bit, then you'll probably get some form of symptoms that way, gut disturbance, which would be an indicator. Another way, and we've not talked about it yet, is that nucleotides are also very much implicated in energy, because we all talk about things like ATP, and I don't think we really think about it in terms of, well, actually that's a nucleotide, because it's adenosine triphosphate, and adenosine, of course, is nucleotide. So if there's a shortage of adenosine in the diet, and the body's under a lot of stress, then the chances are the energy is in deficit. So by one of the first things we see when people take our products, particularly older people, is that they get a release of energy. They feel more energetic. And part of the reason that they will do this is that when the body builds a nucleotide from its de novo process, so it's building it mainly in the liver, that actually is a lot of biochemical processes. So between 12 and 14, depending on a purine and a pyrimidine. And that takes a lot of energy. So if you can actually provide the body with some purified forms, it will save some energy.
Yes.
But also bear in mind that energy in the body is there are two main ones. There's the ATP and GTP. They're both based on nucleotides. So
yes,
that would explain energy.
It does. It's very, very logical, isn't it? So, that is so helpful, Rachel. Thank you. We're going to leave this module here, and I just want to say to everybody, remember that underneath the video, you'll see the show notes. And if you have any questions, leave us some questions underneath, and I know that Rachel will be able to check in and answer them for you. Or by all means, please email her. Again, her details are below this video. And do join us for module 4, because we'll be coming back in a little while with the 4 important roles of nucleotides and the evidence. Now, I was really impressed with the evidence-based when Rachel and I first started speaking, and I didn't know anything about nucleotide nutrition at all. So please join us for that module, because you will find it so interesting. It will blow your socks off. We'll see you soon. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you.